Good morning, friends. It is Sunday at like 9 something, and we are back and ready to read. We've been gone for a couple days, and we just got back, and I've been so stressed because I am so far behind. And Jack is not here. He's still at the kennel, so I'm going to pick him up as soon as we're done reading. I cannot wait. He's never stayed anywhere before other than with me, so I cannot wait for him to come home. I've missed him like crazy, and they've been sending me pictures of him that are ridiculously goofy. So we're going to get Jack as soon as we're done. But because I was gone forever, we have a ton of chapters to read. I actually literally had to write it down because we have to switch back and forth. And you know me, the last time we had to do that, I was like, I don't know how much we have to read. We're done. So because we're so behind, we can't do that today. And we have a lot to read. So we are in 1 Samuel if you want to read along. If you just want me to read to you, that's totally fine too. Forgive me if I sound very tired. We got home at 2 o'clock in the morning last night, and I am tired. So we're going to start in first. I lied. First. There are 2 Samuels. We're in 1 Samuel on chapter 13, and we're going to read in this book for a while before we change to Psalms. So if you want to read along, go for it. If not, I'm just going to jump right in, and I'm glad that you're here. Happy Sunday. Okay. Saul was 32 years old when he became king, and he reigned for 42 years. Saul selected 3,000 special troops from the army of Israel and sent the rest of the men home. He took 2,000 of the chosen men with him to Michmash in the hill country of Bethel. The other 1,000 went with Saul's son Jonathan to Gibeah in the land of Benjamin. Soon after this, Jonathan attacked and defeated the garrison of Philistines at Geba. The news quickly spread among the Philistines that Israel was in revolt, so Saul sounded the call to arms throughout Israel. He announced that the Philistine garrison at Geba had been destroyed and warned the people that the Philistines now hated the Israelites more than ever. The entire Israelite army mobilized again and met Saul at Gilgal. The Philistines mustered a mighty army of 3,000 chariots, 6,000 horsemen, and as many warriors as the grains of sand along the seashore. Awesome. The enemy camped at Michmash east of Bethaven. When the men of Israel saw the vast number of enemy troops, they lost their nerve entirely and tried to hide in caves, holes, rocks, tombs, and cisterns. Some of them crossed the Jordan River and escaped into the land of Gad and Gilead. There were so many, they were like, we're not doing that. Meanwhile, Saul stayed at Gilgal, and the men were trembling with fear. Saul waited there 7 days for Samuel, as Samuel had instructed him earlier, but Samuel didn't come. Saul realized that the troops were rapidly slipping away, so he demanded, "Bring me the burnt offering and the peace offerings." And Saul sacrificed the burnt offering himself. Just as Saul was finishing with the burnt offering, Samuel arrived, and Saul went out to meet and welcome him. But Samuel said, "What is this that you have done?" Saul replied, "I saw my men scattering from me, and you didn't arrive when you said you would. The Philistines at Michmash are ready for battle." So I said, "The Philistines are ready to march against us, and I haven't even asked for the Lord's help. So I felt obliged to offer the burnt offering myself before you came." "How foolish," Samuel exclaimed. "You have disobeyed the command of the Lord your God. Had you obeyed, the Lord would have established your kingdom over Israel forever. But now your dynasty must end, for the Lord has sought out a man after his own heart. The Lord has already chosen him to be king over his people, for you have not obeyed the Lord's command." Samuel then left Gilgal and went on his way, but the rest of the troops went with Saul to meet the army. They went out from Gilgal to Gibeah in the land of Benjamin, and when Saul counted the men who were still with him, he found only 600 left. Saul and Jonathan and the troops with them were staying at Geba near Gibeah in the land of Benjamin. The Philistines set up their camp at Michmash, and 3 raiding parties soon left the camp of the Philistines. One went north towards Ophrah in the land of Shual, another went west to Beth Horon, and the third moved towards the border above the valley of Zeboim near the wilderness. There were no blacksmiths in the land of Israel those days. The Philistines wouldn't allow them for fear that they would make swords and spears for the Hebrews. So whenever the Israelites needed to sharpen their plowshares, picks, axes, or sickles, they had to take them to a Philistine blacksmith. The schedule of charges was as follows. It was a quarter for an ounce of silver for sharpening a plowshare or a pick, and an eighth of an ounce for sharpening an axe, a sickle, or an oak's goad. So none of the people of Israel had a sword or a spear except for Saul and Jonathan. The pass at Michmash had meanwhile been secured by a contingent of the Philistine army. That's crazy. They didn't have any swords. You're going to battle, you have no swords. Does not seem like a good idea to me. But chapter 14 is Jonathan's daring plan. One day Jonathan said to the young man who carried his armor, "Come on, let's go over where the Philistines have their outpost." But Jonathan did not tell his father what he was doing. Meanwhile, Saul and his 600 men were camped on the outskirts of Gibeah around the pomegranate tree at Migron. Among Saul's men was Ahijah the priest, who was wearing the linen ephod. Ahijah was the son of Ahitub, Ichabod's brother, and Ahitub was the son of Phinehas and the grandson of Eli, the priest of the Lord who had served at Shiloh. No one realized that Jonathan had left the Israelite camp. To reach the Philistine outpost, Jonathan had to go down between two rocky cliffs that were called Bozez and Seneh. The cliff on the north was in front of Michmash, the one on the south was in front of Geba. "Let's go across and see those pagans," Jonathan said to his armor-bearer. "Perhaps the Lord will help us, for nothing can hinder the Lord. He can win a battle, whether he has many warriors or only a few." "Do what you think is best," the youth replied. "I am with you completely, whatever you decide." "All right, then," Jonathan told him. "We'll cross over and let them see us. If they say to us, 'Stay where you are or we'll kill you,' then we will stop and not go up to them. But if they say, 'Come up on and fight,' then we will go up. That will be the Lord's sign that he will help us defeat them." When the Philistines saw them coming, they shouted, "Look, the Hebrews are crawling out of their holes." Then they shouted to Jonathan, "Come on up here and we'll teach you a lesson." "Come on, climb right behind me," Jonathan said to his armor-bearer, "for the Lord will help us defeat them." So they climbed up using both hands and feet, and the Philistines fell back as Jonathan and his armor-bearer killed them right and left. They killed about 20 men in all, and their bodies were scattered over about half an acre. Suddenly, panic broke out in the Philistine army, both in camp and in the field, including even the outposts and the raiding parties. And just then an earthquake struck, and everyone was terrified. Saul's lookouts at Gibeah saw a strange sight. The vast army of the Philistines began to melt away in every direction. "Find out who isn't here," Saul ordered, and when they checked, they found that Jonathan and his armor-bearer were gone. Then Saul shouted to Ahijah, "Bring the ephod here." For at that time Ahijah was wearing the ephod in front of the Israelites. But when Saul was talking to the priest, the shouting and confusion in the Philistine camp grew louder and louder. So Saul said to Ahijah, "Never mind, let's keep going." Then Saul and his 600 men rushed out into battle and found the Philistines killing each other. There was a terrible confusion everywhere, and even the Hebrews who had gone over to the Philistine army revolted and joined in with Saul, Jonathan, and the rest of the Israelites. Likewise, the men who were hiding in the hills joined the chase when they saw the Philistines running away. So the Lord saved Israel that day, and the battle continued to rage even beyond Beth-aven. Now the men of Israel were worn out that day, because Saul had made them take an oath, saying, "Let a curse fall on anyone who eats before evening, before I have had full revenge on my enemies." So no one ate a thing all day, and even though they found honeycomb on the ground in the forest, they did not touch the honey, because they all feared the oath they had taken. But Jonathan had not heard his father's command, and he dipped a stick into the piece of honeycomb and ate the honey. After he'd eaten it, he felt much better. But one of the men saw him and said, "Your father made the army take a strict oath that anyone who eats food today will be cursed. That's why everyone is weary and faint." "My father has made trouble for us all," Jonathan exclaimed. "A command like that only hurts us. See how much better I feel now that I've eaten this little bit of honey? If the men had been allowed to eat freely from the food they found among our enemies, think how many more we could have killed." But hungry as they were, they chased and killed the Philistines all day, from Michmash to Ajalon, growing more and more faint. That evening they flew upon the battle plunder and butchered the sheep, cattle, and calves, but they ate them without draining the blood, because it was nighttime, so they were so hungry. Okay. Someone reported to Saul, "Look, the men are sinning against the Lord by eating meat that still has blood in it." "That is very wrong," Saul said. "Find a large stone and roll it over here. Then go out among the troops and tell them, 'Bring the cattle and sheep here to kill them and drain the blood. Do not sin against the Lord by eating meat with the blood still in it.'" So that night all the troops brought their animals and slaughtered them there, and Saul built an altar to the Lord, the first one he had ever built. Then Saul said, "Let's chase the Philistines all night and destroy every last one of them." His men replied, "We'll do whatever you think is best." But the priest said, "Let's ask God first." So Saul asked God, "Should we go after the Philistines? Will you help us defeat them?" But God made no reply that day. Then Saul said to the leaders, "Something's wrong. I want all of my army commanders to come here. We must find out what sin was committed today. I vow by the name of the Lord who rescued Israel that the sinner will surely die, even if it's my own son Jonathan." But no one would tell him what the trouble was. Then Saul said, "Jonathan and I will stand over here, and all of you stand over there." And the people agreed. Then Saul prayed, "O Lord, God of Israel, please show us who is guilty and who is innocent. Are Jonathan and I guilty, or is the sin among the others?" And Jonathan and Saul were chosen as the guilty ones, and the people were declared innocent. Then Saul said, "Now choose between me and Jonathan." And Jonathan was shown to be the guilty one. "Tell me what you have done," Saul demanded of Jonathan. "I tasted a little honey," Jonathan admitted. "It was only a little bit on the end of the stick. Does that deserve death?" "Yes, Jonathan," Saul said. "You must die. May God strike me dead if you are not executed for this." But the people broke in and said to Saul, "Should Jonathan, who saved Israel today, die? Far from it. As surely as the Lord lives, not one hair on his head will be touched, for it has been used of God to do a mighty miracle today." So the people rescued Jonathan, and he was not put to death. Then Saul called back the army from chasing the Philistines, and the Philistines returned home. Now, when Saul had secured his grasp on Israel's throne, he fought against the enemies in every direction, against Moab, Ammon, Edom, the kings of Zobah, the kings of the Philistines, and wherever he turned, he was victorious. He did great deeds and conquered the Amalekites, saving Israel from all those who had plundered them. Saul's sons included Jonathan, Ishbosheth, and Malchishua. He also had 2 daughters, Merab, who was older, and Michal. Saul's wife was Ahinoam, the daughter of Ahimaaz, and the commander of Saul's army was his cousin Abner, his uncle Ner's son. Abner's father Ner and Saul's father Kish were brothers. Both were sons of Abiel. The Israelites fought constantly with the Philistines throughout Saul's lifetime, so whenever Saul saw a young man who was brave and strong, he drafted him into his army. All right, that was chapter 14. I'm Muslim, but I'm trying to go ham in some cheeks this morning. Interesting. Okay, so chapter 15 is kind of long. One day Samuel said to Saul, "I anointed you king of Israel because the Lord told me to. Now listen to this message from the Lord. This is what the Lord Almighty says. I have decided to settle accounts with the nation of Amalek for opposing Israel when they came from Egypt. Now go and completely destroy the entire Amalekite nation, men, women, children, babies, cattle, sheep, camels, and donkeys." So Saul mobilized his army at Tilam. There were 200,000 troops in addition to 10,000 men from Judah. Then Saul went to the city of Amalek and lay in wait in the valley, and Saul sent this message to the Kenites: "Move away from where the Amalekites live, or else you will die with them, for you were kind to the people of Israel when they came up from Egypt." So the Kenites packed up and left. Then Saul slaughtered the Amalekites from Havilah all the way to Shur, east of Egypt. He captured Agag, the Amalekite king, and completely destroyed everyone else. Saul and his men spared Agag's life and kept the best sheep and cattle, the fat calves and lambs, everything, in fact, that appealed to them. They destroyed only what was worthless and of poor quality. Then the Lord said to Samuel, "I'm sorry that I ever made Saul king, for he has not been loyal to me and has refused to obey me." Samuel was so deeply moved when he heard this that he cried out to the Lord all night. Early the next morning, Samuel went to find Saul, and someone told him Saul went to Carmel to set up a monument to himself, and then he went on to Gilgal. When Samuel finally found him, Saul greeted him cheerfully. "May the Lord bless you," he said. "I've carried out the Lord's command." "Then what is all the bleating of sheep and lowing of cattle I hear?" Samuel demanded. "It's true that the army spared the best of the sheep and the cattle," Saul admitted, "but they were going to sacrifice them to the Lord your God. We've destroyed everything else." Then Samuel said to Saul, "Stop. Listen to what the Lord told me last night." "What was it?" Saul asked. And Samuel told him, "Although you may think little of yourself, are you not the leader of the tribes of Israel? The Lord has anointed you king of Israel, and the Lord sent you on a mission and told you, 'Go and completely destroy the sinners, the Amalekites, until they are all dead.' Why haven't you obeyed the Lord? Why did you rush for the plunder and do exactly what the Lord said not to do?" "But I did obey the Lord," Saul insisted. "I carried out the mission he gave me, and I brought back King Agag, and I destroyed everything else. Then my troops brought in the best of the sheep and cattle, I can't read, to sacrifice to the Lord your God in Gilgal." But Samuel replied, "What is more pleasing to the Lord, your burnt offerings and sacrifices, or your obedience to his voice? Obedience is far better than sacrifice." Ouch. "Listening to him is much better than offering the fat of rams. Rebellion is as bad as the sin of witchcraft, and stubbornness is as bad as worshiping idols. Because you have rejected the word of the Lord, he's rejected you from being king." Interesting. So pretty much obedience is better than anything else, and rebellion and stubbornness are as bad as worshiping idols. I've been struggling a lot with sin in general and why we all deserve to die, because we're all sinners, and how, sin separates us from God eternally. And I've been struggling with that a lot. And that hurt. That's like, right to the core, right? Like, you might not have thought that you sinned. And how much is that like us? Like, no, I listened to you. I only did one little thing, but I listened to the rest of it. Yikes. Okay. Yikes. Good morning. Thank you for being here. You may fall from the sky, you may fall from a tree, but the best way to fall is in love with me. That's a cute rhyme. Okay, let's keep reading because it says he's going to plead for forgiveness, and I feel like I might need to too. Then Saul finally admitted, yes, I've sinned. I've disobeyed your instructions and the Lord's command, for I was afraid of the people and did what they demanded. Oh, please forgive my sin now and go with me to worship the Lord. But Samuel replied, I will not return with you. Since you rejected the Lord's command, he's rejected you from being king of Israel. It makes me think about that TikTok that's like, I ain't talking about you, you're talking about me. But it's probably not appropriate when you're reading the Bible. Okay. As Samuel turned to go, Saul grabbed him to try to hold him back and tore his robe. And Samuel said to him, see, the Lord has torn the kingdom of Israel from you today and given it to someone else, one who is better than you. And he who is the glory of Israel will not lie, nor will he change his mind, for he is not human that he should change his mind. Then Saul pleaded again, I know that I've sinned, but please at least honor me before the leaders and before my people by going with me to worship the Lord your God. So Samuel finally agreed and went with him, and Saul worshipped the Lord. Then Samuel said, bring King Agag to me. Agag arrived full of smiles, for he thought, surely the worst is over, and I have been spared. But Samuel said, as your sword has killed the sons of many mothers, now your mother will be childless. And Samuel cut Agag to pieces before the Lord at Gilgal. Then Samuel went home to Ramah, and Saul returned to his house at Gibeah. Samuel never went to meet with Saul again, but he mourned constantly for him, and the Lord was sorry that he'd ever made Saul king of Israel. Yikes. Finally, the Lord said to Samuel, you've mourned long enough for Saul. I have rejected him as king of Israel. Now fill your horn with olive oil and go to Bethlehem. Find a man named Jesse who lives there, for I have selected one of his sons to be my new king. But Samuel asked, how can I do that? If Saul hears about it, he'll kill me. Take a heifer with you, the Lord replied, and say that you've come to make a sacrifice to the Lord. Invite Jesse to the sacrifice, and I will show you which of his sons to anoint for me. So Samuel did as the Lord instructed him. When he arrived at Bethlehem, the leaders of the town became afraid. What's wrong? They asked. Do you come in peace? Yes, Samuel replied. I've come to sacrifice to the Lord. Purify yourselves and come with me to the sacrifice. Then Samuel performed the purification rite for Jesse and his sons and invited him too. When they arrived, Samuel took one look at Eliab and thought, surely this is the Lord's anointed. But the Lord said to Samuel, do not judge by appearance or height, for I have rejected him. The Lord doesn't make decisions the way that you do. People judge by outward appearance, but the Lord looks at a person's thoughts and intentions. Then Jesse told his son Abinadab to step forward and walk in front of Samuel. But Samuel said, this is not the one the Lord has chosen. Next Jesse summoned Shema, but Samuel said, neither is this the one the Lord has chosen. In the same way, all 7 of Jesse's sons were presented to Samuel. But Samuel said to Jesse, the Lord has not chosen any of these. Then Samuel asked, are these all the sons you have? There is still the youngest, Jesse replied, but he's out in the fields watching the sheep. Send for him at once, Samuel said. We will not sit down to eat until he arrives. So Jesse sent for him. He was ruddy and handsome with pleasant eyes, and the Lord said, this is the one. Anoint him. So as David stood there among his brothers, Samuel took the olive oil he'd brought and poured it on David's head, and the Spirit of the Lord came mightily upon him from that day on. Then Samuel returned to Ramah. Now the Spirit of the Lord had left Saul, and the Lord sent a tormenting spirit to fill him with depression and fear. Some of Saul's servants suggested a remedy. It is clear that a spirit from God is tormenting you, they said. Let us find a good musician to play the harp for you whenever the tormenting spirit is bothering you. The harp music will quiet you, and you will soon be well again. All right, Saul said, find me someone who plays well and bring him here. One of the servants said to Saul, the son of Jesse is a talented harp player. Not only that, but he's brave and strong and has good judgment. He's also a fine-looking young man, and the Lord is with him. So Saul sent messengers to Jesse to say, send me your son David, the shepherd. Jesse responded by sending David to Saul along with a young goat and a donkey, loaded down with food and wine. So David went to Saul and served him. Saul liked David very much, and David became one of Saul's armor-bearers. Then Saul sent word to Jesse, asking, please let David join my staff, for I'm very pleased with him. And whenever the tormenting spirit from God troubled Saul, David would play the harp. Then Saul would feel better, and the tormenting spirit would go away. Okay, so if you're David's father, if you're Jesse, and you know that he's anointed, and you know that Saul's crazy and kills people, would you really want to send your son to hang out with him and be part of his group? I wouldn't. And anybody that's watching, if you guys have any thoughts on this, I would love to hear them. I didn't know that God would send spirits to people. Like, it literally says a spirit from God is tormenting you. The Lord sent a tormenting spirit to fill him with depression and fear. Is that an Old Testament thing? Is that something that I'm missing? Because I didn't know that God sent spirits to people, and that's a little bit scary. So if you have any thoughts on that, I would love to hear them, because I've never read that before, and I wasn't sure. He controls the demons, so yeah, but why would he send a tormenting spirit to a person? Like, that's what confuses me. I mean, if we're his followers, like, that doesn't seem, I don't know, that confuses me. Like, I can understand why he would send an angel to give a message, or why he sent away the demon that was in that guy and had him go over the pigs. Remember, Jesus did that? But I've never heard of him sending a spirit to torment a person, and I want to believe that he doesn't do bad things like that. All right, well, we'll keep reading. Maybe they will give us a better answer. So chapter 17. Okay, so the Philistines now mustered their army for battle and camped between Soco in Judah and Ezekah at Ephes-Dammim. Saul countered by gathering his troops in the valley of Elah, and the Philistines and the Israelites faced each other on opposite hills with the valley between them. Then Goliath, a Philistine champion from Gath, came out from the Philistine ranks to face the forces of Israel. He was a giant of a man, measuring over 9 feet tall. He wore a bronze helmet and a coat of mail that weighed 125 pounds. He also wore bronze leggings, and slung a javelin over his back. The shaft of his spear was as heavy and thick as a weaver's beam, tipped with an iron spearhead that weighed 15 pounds. An armor-bearer walked ahead of him carrying a huge shield. Goliath stood and shouted across to the Israelites, "Do you need a whole army to settle this? Choose someone to fight for you, and I will represent the Philistines. We'll settle this dispute in a single combat. If your man is able to kill me, then we will be your slaves. But if I kill him, you will be our slaves. I defy the armies of Israel, and send me a man who will fight with me." When Saul and the Israelites heard this, they were terrified and deeply shaken. I would be true. So this so much reminds me of Game of Thrones, which is terrible. But don't you remember seeing the mountain and how, like, he was that big and huge, and I would be scared to death. And then the guy that had the spear that came and fought with him and almost won, if it wasn't for his pride. Yeah. Okay, I'm so sorry. Good morning. I think you have to find the truth within the Bible. Men have translated that thing so much it's insane. Like the Israelites translating the Sanskrit changed all the kings' names. I agree, that is true. And we're reading the version that's called the book, because I snatched my son's Bible. And it's meant for kids, like it's easy to understand. So you're right, like the translation might not be correct. So thank you for that. What I'll do, I won't promise when I will do it, but I will go and try to figure out what the real translation of that meant, because maybe it wasn't actually spirit, maybe it was something else. Thank you. Okay, so we're back to Goliath, and he scares me like the mountain in Game of Thrones. Now David was the son of a man named Jesse, an Ephrathite from Bethlehem in the land of Judah. Jesse was an old man at the time, and he had 8 sons in all. Jesse's 3 oldest sons, Eliab, Abinadab, and Shammah, had already joined Saul's army to fight the Philistines. David was the youngest of Jesse's sons, and since his older 3 brothers were in the army, they stayed with Saul's forces all the time. But David went back and forth between working for Saul and helping his father with the sheep in Bethlehem. For 40 days, there's that number again, 40, twice a day, morning and evening, the Philistine Giants strutted in front of the Israelite army. One day Jesse said to David, "Take this half bushel of roasted grain and these 10 loaves of bread to your brothers. Give these 10 cuts of cheese to their captain and see how your brothers are getting along. Then bring me back a letter from them." David's brothers were with Saul in the Israelite army in the valley of Elah, fighting against the Philistines. So David left the sheep with another shepherd and set out early the next morning with the gifts. He arrived at the outskirts of camp just as the Israelite army was leaving for the battlefield with shouts and battle cries. Soon the Israelites and Philistine forces stood facing each other, army against army. David left things for the keeper of the supplies and hurried out to the ranks to greet his brothers. As he was talking with them, he saw Goliath, the champion from Gath, come out of the Philistine ranks, shouting his challenge at the army of Israel. As soon as the Israelite army saw him, they began to run away in fright. "Have you seen the giant?" the men were asking. "He comes out each day to challenge Israel. And have you heard about the huge reward the king has offered to anyone who kills him? The king will give him one of his daughters for a wife, and his whole family will be exempted from paying taxes." Now that's a good present. David talked to some others standing there to verify the report. "What will a man get for killing this Philistine and putting an end to the abuse of Israel?" he asked them. "Who is this pagan Philistine anyway that he's allowed to defy the armies of the living God?" And David received the same reply as before. "What you've been hearing is true. That is the reward for killing the giant." When David's oldest brother Eliab heard David talking to the men, he was angry. "What are you doing around here anyway?" he demanded. "What about those few sheep you're supposed to be taking care of? I know about your pride and dishonesty. You just want to see the battle." Wow. "What have I done now?" David replied. "I was only asking a question." He walked over to some others and asked them the same thing and received the same answer. Then David's question was reported to King Saul, and the king sent for him. "Don't worry about a thing," David told Saul. "I'll go fight this Philistine." "Don't be ridiculous," Saul replied. "There's no way you can go against this Philistine. You're only a boy, and he has been in the army since he was a boy." But David persisted. "I've been taking care of my father's sheep," he said. "When a lion or a bear comes to steal a lamb from the flock, I go after it with a club and take the lamb from its mouth. If the animal turns on me, I catch it by the jaw and club it to death." Okay. "I have been doing this to both lions and bears, and I'll do it to this pagan Philistine too, for he has defied the armies of the living God. The Lord who saved me from the claws of the lion and the bear will save me from this Philistine." Saul finally consented. "All right, go ahead." Good morning. We're in 1 Samuel 17. Verse 38. Then Saul gave David his own armor, a bronze helmet and a coat of mail. David put it on, strapped a sword over it, and took a step or two to see what it was like, for he'd never worn such a thing before. "I can't go in these," he protested. "I'm not used to them." So he took them off again. He picked up 5 smooth stones from a stream and put them in his shepherd's bag, and then, armed only with his shepherd's staff and a sling, he started across to fight Goliath. Hold on, pause. David just said, "When a lion or a bear comes, I go after it with a club. If it turns on me, I catch it by the jaw and I club it to death," right? That's what he said. He goes after it with a club. Okay, then why is he leaving with 5 stones and a staff? You said you were going to kill it like you killed the bear. I know what happens, but if I was Saul, I'd be worried. Goliath walked out towards David with the shield bearer ahead of him, sneering in contempt at the ruddy-faced boy. "Am I a dog," he roared at David, "that you come at me with a stick?" Well, maybe the stick is the club. Then he cursed to David by the name of his gods. "Come over here, and I'll give your flesh to the birds and the wild animals," he yelled. David shouted in reply, "You come to me with sword, spear, and javelin, but I come to you in the name of the Lord Almighty, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied. Today the Lord will conquer you, and I will kill you and cut off your head. Then I will give the dead bodies of your men to the birds and wild animals, and the whole world will know that there is God in Israel. And everyone will know that the Lord does not need weapons to rescue his people. It is his battle, not ours. And the Lord will give you to us." As Goliath moved closer to attack, David quickly ran out to meet him. Reaching into his shepherd's bag and taking out a stone, he hurled it from his sling and hit the Philistine in the forehead. The stone sank in, and Goliath stumbled and fell face down to the ground. So David triumphed over the Philistine giant with only a stone and a sling. And since he had no sword, he ran over and pulled Goliath's sword from its sheath, and David used it to kill the giant and cut off his head. When the Philistines saw their great champion was dead, they turned and ran. Then the Philistines gave a great shout of triumph and Then the Israelites gave a great shout of triumph and rushed after the Philistines, chasing them as far as Gath and the gates of Ekron. The bodies of the dead and wounded Philistines were strewn all along the road from Shaaraim as far as Gath and Ekron. Then the Israelite army returned and plundered the deserted Philistine camp. David took Goliath's head to Jerusalem, but he stored the Philistines' armor in his own tent. As Saul watched David go out to fight Goliath, he asked Abner, the general of his army, "Abner, whose son is he?" "I really don't know," Abner said. "We'll find out," the king told him. After David had killed Goliath, Abner brought him to Saul with the Philistine head still in his hand. "Tell me about your father, my boy," Saul said, and David replied, "His name is Jesse, and we live in Bethlehem." Chapter 18. After David had finished talking with Saul, he met Jonathan, the king's son. There was an immediate bond of love between them, and they became the best of friends. From that day on, Saul kept David with him at the palace and wouldn't let him return home. And Jonathan made a special vow to be David's friend, and he sealed the pact by giving him his robe, tunic, sword, bow, and belt. Whatever Saul asked David to do, David did it successfully. So Saul made him a commander in his army, an appointment that was applauded by the fighting men and officers alike. But something happened when the victorious Israelite army was returning home after David killed Goliath. Women came out from all the towns along the way to celebrate and cheer for King Saul, and they sang and danced for joy with tambourines and cymbals. This was their song. Saul has killed his thousands, and David his 10,000s. I knew that was going to happen. This made Saul very angry. Yeah. What's this? He said. They'll credit David with 10,000s and me with only thousands. Next, they'll be making him their king. From that time on, Saul kept a jealous eye on David. Someone's awake. The very next day, in fact, a tormenting spirit from God overwhelmed Saul, and he began to rave like a madman. David began to play the harp, as he did whenever this happened. But Saul, who had a spear in his hand, suddenly hurled it at David, intending to pin him to the wall. But David jumped aside and escaped. This happened another time too, for Saul was afraid of him, and he was jealous because the Lord had left him and was now with David. Finally, Saul banned him from his presence and appointed him commander over only 1,000 men, but David faithfully led his troops in battle. David continued to succeed in everything he did, and the Lord was with him. When Saul recognized this, he became even more afraid of him, and all of Israel and Judah loved David because he was so successful at leading his troops in battle. Good morning.
Good morning.
How'd you sleep?
Actually, really good. I woke up at 10:05.
We got home very late last night, so normally he would be in here playing games when I started, but he was sleeping in.
We got home at 2
Yeah. Thank you very much. I know, we got home at 2 o'clock in the morning. It was very late. Okay, that's crazy. So Saul tried to pin him to the wall twice and then banned him from his sight. Okay. All right, so we're almost done with chapter 18. One day, Saul said to David, "I'm ready to give you my older daughter Merab as your wife. But first, you must prove yourself to be a real warrior by fighting the Lord's battles." For Saul thought to himself, if I send him out against the Philistines, I could let them kill him rather than doing it myself. He's a very sweet guy. "Who am I, and what is my family in Israel that I should be the king's son-in-law?" David exclaimed. "My father's family is nothing." So when the time came for the wedding, Saul gave Merab in marriage to Adriel, a man from Meholah. In the meantime, Saul's daughter Michal had fallen in love with David, and Saul was delighted when he heard about it. "Here's another chance to see him killed by the Philistines," Saul said to himself. But to David, he said, "I have a way for you to become my son-in-law after all." Then Saul told his men to say confidentially to David, "The king really likes you, and so do we. Why don't you accept the king's offer to become his son-in-law?" When Saul's men said these things to David, he replied, "How can a poor man from a humble family afford the bride price for the daughter of a king?" When Saul's men reported this back to the king, he told them, "Tell David all I want for the bride price is 100 Philistine foreskins." That's sweet. "Vengeance on my enemies is all I really want." But what Saul had in mind was that David would be killed in the fight. David was delighted to accept the offer, so before the time limit expired, he went out with his men and killed 200 Philistines and presented all their foreskins to the king. So Saul gave Michal to David to be his wife. When the king realized how much the Lord was with David and how much Michal loved him, he became even more afraid, and he remained David's enemy for the rest of his life. Whenever the Philistine army attacked, David was more successful against them than all of Saul's other officers. So David's name became very famous throughout the land. That's a very odd price. To me, that does not really go with getting married. And whose job was it to cut all of them? These are my questions. Okay, so we're almost on chapter 19. Good morning. Glad you are here. Okay, so chapter 19. Saul now urged his servants and his son Jonathan to assassinate David. But Jonathan, because of his close friendship with David, told him what his father was planning. "Tomorrow morning," he warned, "you must find a hiding place out in the fields. I'll ask my father to go out there with me, and I'll talk to him about you. Then I'll tell you everything I can find out." The next morning, Jonathan spoke with his father about David, saying many good things about him. "Please don't sin against David," Jonathan pleaded. "He's never done anything to harm you, and he's always helped you in any way he could. Have you forgotten about the time he risked his life to kill the Philistine giant, and how the Lord brought a great victory to Israel as a result? You were certainly happy about it then, so why should you murder an innocent man like David? There's no reason for it at all." Morning, Colvin. Now 2. And then there were 2. So Saul listened to Jonathan and vowed, "As surely as the Lord lives, David will not be killed." Afterwards, Jonathan called David and told him what happened. Then he took David to see Saul, and everything was as it had been before. War broke out shortly after that, and David led his troops against the Philistines. He attacked them with such a fury that they all ran away. But one day, as Saul was sitting at home, that same tormenting spirit from the Lord came upon him again. As David played his harp for the king, Saul hurled his spear at David in an attempt to kill him. But David dodged out of the way and escaped into the night, leaving the spear stuck in the wall. That's 3. That's 3 times. We have a thing in our house where if you say something 3 times, it means you really mean it. Like, it can be something silly, like, I'd love to go to McDonald's for dinner. And if someone's like, really? And you're like, yeah, but I really like McDonald's. That's only twice. But if you're like, okay, I think I want McDonald's, then we go. Because if you've said it 3 times, it means you really mean it. And that was the 3rd time they tried to spear him to the wall. So I think he meant it. I mean, if someone's throwing a spear at you, I think they mean it the first time, but I'm just saying. Okay, then Saul sent troops to watch David's house. They were told to kill David when he came out the next morning. But Michal, David's wife, warned him, if you don't get away tonight, you'll be dead by morning. So she helped him climb out a window, and he escaped. Then she took an idol and put it in his bed, covered it with blankets, and put a cushion of goat hair at its head. She was like the OG Ferris Bueller. When the troops came out to arrest David, she told them he was sick and couldn't get out of bed. Then bring him to me in his bed, Saul ordered, so I can kill him as he lies there. And he sent them back to David's house. When they came to carry David out, they discovered it was only an idol in a bed with a cushion of goat's hair at its head. Why have you tricked me and let my enemy escape? Saul demanded of Michal. I had to, Michal said. He threatened to kill me if I didn't help him. So David got away and went to Ramah to see Samuel, and he told them all that Saul had done to him. Then Samuel took David with him to live at Naioth. When the report reached Saul that David was at Naioth in Ramah, he sent troops to capture him. But when they arrived, they saw Samuel and the other prophets prophesying. The Spirit of God came upon Saul's men, and they also began to prophesy. Then Saul heard what happened. He sent other troops, and they too prophesied. The same thing happened a 3rd time. 3rd time. Finally, Saul himself went to Ramah and arrived at the great wall at Siku. Where are Samuel and David? He demanded. They are at Naioth in Ramah, someone told him. But on the way to Naioth, the Spirit of God came upon Saul, and he too began to prophesy. He tore off his clothes and lay on the ground all day and night, prophesying in the presence of Samuel. The people who were watching exclaimed, "What? Is Saul a prophet too?" Okay, so we're supposed to read chapter 20, and then we start to switch. So this is chapter 20. Good morning. Okay, David fled from Naioth and Ramah and found Jonathan. What have I done? He exclaimed. What is my crime, and how have I offended your father that he's so determined to kill me? That's not true, Jonathan protested. I'm sure he's not planning any such thing, for he always tells me everything he's going to do, even the little things. I know he wouldn't hide something like this from me. It just isn't so. He just put men outside of his house and said, bring him in his bed to kill me. I don't think Jonathan knows. Then David took an oath before Jonathan and said, your father knows perfectly well about our friendship. And he said to himself, I won't tell Jonathan. Why should I hurt him? But I swear to you that I'm only a step away from death. I swear it by the Lord and by your own soul. Tell me what I can do, Jonathan exclaimed. David replied, tomorrow we celebrate the new moon festival. I've always eaten with your father on this occasion, but tomorrow I'll hide in the field and stay there until the evening on the 3rd day. If your father asks where I am, tell him I asked permission to go home to Bethlehem for an annual family sacrifice. If he says fine, then you'll know all is well. But if he's angry and loses his temper, then you'll know he was planning to kill me. Show me this kindness as my sworn friend, for we made a covenant together before the Lord. Or kill me yourself as I have sinned against your father, but please don't betray me to him. Never, Jonathan exclaimed. You know that if I had the slightest notion my father was planning to kill you, I would tell you at once. Then David asked, how will I know whether or not your father is angry? Come out into the fields with me, Jonathan replied, and they went out there together. And then Jonathan told David, I promise by the Lord the God of Israel that by this time tomorrow, or the next day at the latest, gave himself a cushion, I will talk to my father and let you know at once how he feels about you. If he speaks favorably about you, I will let you know. But if he's angry and wants you killed, may the Lord kill me if I don't warn you, so that you can escape and live. May the Lord be with you as he used to be with my father, and may you treat me with the faithful love of the Lord as long as I live. But if I die, treat my family with this faithful love, even when the Lord destroys all of your enemies. So Jonathan made a covenant with David, saying, may the Lord destroy all of your enemies. And Jonathan made David reaffirm his vow of friendship again, for Jonathan loved David as much as he loved himself. Then Jonathan said, tomorrow we celebrate the new moon festival. You'll be missed when your place at the table is empty. The day after tomorrow, toward evening, go to the place where you hid before and wait there by the stone pile. I will come out and shoot 3 arrows to the side of the stone pile as though I were shooting at a target. Then I will send a boy to bring the arrows back. If you hear me tell him, 'They're on this side,' then you will know, as surely as the Lord lives, that all is well and there is no trouble. But if I tell him, 'Go further, the arrows are still ahead of you,' then it will mean that you must leave immediately, for the Lord is sending you away. And may the Lord make us keep our promises to each other, for he has witnessed them." So David hid himself in the field, and when the new moon festival began, the king sat down to eat. He sat at his usual place against the wall, with Jonathan sitting opposite him and Abner beside him. But David's place was empty. Saul didn't say anything about it that day, for he said to himself, "Something must have made David ceremonially unclean. Yes, that must be why he's not here." But when David's place was empty again the next day, Saul asked Jonathan, "Why hasn't the son of Jesse been here for dinner either yesterday or today?" Jonathan replied, "David earnestly asked me if he could go to Bethlehem. He wanted to take part in a family sacrifice, and his brother demanded that he be there, so I told him he could go. That's why he isn't here." Saul boiled with rage at Jonathan. "You stupid son of a whore," he swore. What did his mom do? "Do you think I don't know that you want David to be king in your place, shaming yourself and your mother? As long as that son of Jesse is alive, you'll never be king. Now go and get him so I can kill him." I think Saul made it pretty clear. "But what has he done?" Jonathan demanded. "Why should he be put to death?" Then Saul hurled his spear at Jonathan, intending to kill him. So at last Jonathan realized that his father really was determined to kill David. Gee, you think? Jonathan left the table in anger and refused to eat all that day, for he was crushed by his father's shameful behavior towards David. The next morning, as agreed, Jonathan went out into the field and took a young boy with him to gather his arrows. "Start running," he told the boy, "so you can find the arrows as I shoot them." So the boy ran, and Jonathan shot an arrow beyond him. When the boy had almost reached the arrow, Jonathan shouted, "The arrow is still ahead of you. Hurry, hurry, don't wait." So the boy quickly gathered up the arrows and ran back to his master. He, of course, didn't understand what Jonathan meant. Only Jonathan and David knew. Then Jonathan gave his bow and arrows to the boy and told him to take them back to the city. As soon as the boy was gone, David came out from where he had been hiding near the stone pile. David bowed to Jonathan with his face on the ground. Both of them were in tears as they embraced each other and said goodbye, especially David. At last Jonathan said to David, "Go in peace, for we've made a pact in the Lord's name. We've entrusted each other and each other's children into the Lord's hands forever." Then David left, and Jonathan returned to the city. Okay, so this is where we have to start jumping, and this is where hold on. So now we need to go to Psalms 11, which is very much in the front because we are reading the Bible in chronological order. So this is going to be what would have happened next is Psalm 11. So it is a Psalm of David. "I trust in the Lord for protection. So why do you say to me, 'Fly to the mountains for safety'? The wicked are stringing their bows and setting their arrows in the bowstrings. They shoot from the shadows at those who do right, and the foundations of law and order have collapsed. What can the righteous do? But the Lord in his holy temple, the Lord still rules from heaven. He watches everything closely, examining everyone on earth. The Lord examines both the righteous and the wicked. He hates everyone who loves violence and rains down blazing coals on the wicked, punishing them with burning sulfur and scorching winds. For the Lord is righteous and he loves justice. Those who do what is right will see his face." Okay, and now Psalm 59 is what? Okay. "Rescue me from my enemies, O God. Protect me from those who have come to destroy me. Rescue me from these criminals, and save me from these murderers. They've set an ambush for me. Fierce enemies are still out there waiting, though I've done them no wrong, O Lord. Despite my innocence, they prepare to kill me. Rise up and help me. Rise up. Look at my plight. O Lord God Almighty, the God of Israel, rise up to punish hostile nations. Show no mercy to wicked traitors." Interlude. "They come at night, snarling like vicious dogs as they prowl the street. Listen to the filth that comes from their mouths, the piercing swords that fly from their lips. Who can hurt us, they sneer. But Lord, you laugh at them. You scoff at all the hostile nations. You are my strength, and I will wait for you to rescue me. For you, O God, are my place of safety. In his unfailing love, my God will come and help me. He will look down and triumph on my enemies. Don't kill them, for my people soon forget such lessons. Stagger them with your power and bring them to your knees, O Lord, our shield. Because of the sinful things they say, because of the evil on their lips, let them be captured by their pride, their curses, and their lies. Destroy them in your anger and wipe them out completely. Then the whole world will know that God reigns in Israel." Interlude. I guess he's singing. That's interesting. My enemies come out at night, snarling like vicious dogs as they prowl the streets. They scavenge for food, but go to sleep unsatisfied. But as for me, I will sing about your power. I will shout with joy each morning because of your unfailing love. For you have been my refuge, my place of safety in the day of distress. O my strength, to you I sing praises. For you, O God, are my refuge, the God who shows me unfailing love. I have to sneeze.
Bless you.
Thank you.
Bless you.
Thank you. Oh, I see that you have a question, but I don't know what it is. Okay, so now we go 1 Samuel 21 to 24. Okay, so we're going to go back to 1 Samuel, which I am in 21 to 24. Okay. All right, let's do it. So David went to the city of Nob to see Ahimelech the priest. Ahimelech trembled when he saw him. "Why are you alone?" he asked. "Why is no one with you?" "The king has sent me on a private matter," David said. "He told me not to tell anyone why I'm here. I've told my men where to meet me later. Now what is there to eat? Give me 5 loaves of bread or anything else you have." "We don't have regular bread," the priest replied, "but there is holy bread, which I guess you can have if your young men have not slept with any woman recently." As long as it wasn't recently. "Don't worry," David said. "I would never allow my men to be with women while they're on a campaign. And since they stay clean, even on ordinary trips, how much more on this one?" Since there was no other food available, the priest gave him the holy bread, the bread of the presence that was placed before the Lord in the tabernacle. It had just been replaced that day with fresh bread. Sorry, this is a lot of reading. Okay. Now Deod the Edomite, Saul's chief herdsman, was there that day for ceremonial purification. David asked Ahimelech, "Do you have a spear or a sword? The king's business is so urgent I didn't even have time to grab a weapon." "I have only the sword of Goliath the Philistine, who you killed in the valley of Elah," the priest replied. "It's wrapped in a cloth behind the ephod. Take that if you want it, for there's nothing else here." "There is nothing like it," David replied. "Give it to me." So David escaped from Saul and went to the king Achish of Gath. But Achish's officers weren't happy about him being there. "Isn't this David, the king of the land?" they asked. "Isn't he the one people honor with dances singing, 'Saul has killed his thousands and David his 10,000s'? David heard these comments and was afraid of what King Achish might do to him. So he pretended to be insane, scratching on doors and drooling down his beard. Finally, the king said to his men, "Must you bring me a madman? We already have enough of them around here." He's like, "There are already enough crazy people. Why did you bring me this one? Why should I let him be my guest?" Okay. So David left Gath and escaped the cave of Adullam. Soon his brothers and other relatives joined him there. Then others began coming, men who were in trouble or in debt or who were just discontented, until David was the leader, about 400 men. Later David went to Mizpah in Moab when he asked the king, "Would you let your father and mother live here under royal protection until I know what God is going to do for me?" The king agreed, and David's parents stayed in Moab while David was living in his stronghold. One day the prophet Gad told David, "Leave the stronghold and return to the land of Judah." So David went to the forest of Hereth. The news of his arrival in Judah soon reached Saul. At this time the king was sitting beneath a tamarisk tree on the hill at Gibeah, holding his spear and surrounded by his officers. "Listen here, you men of Benjamin," Saul shouted when he heard the news. "Has David promised you fields and vineyards? Has he promised to make you commanders in his army? Is that why you've conspired against me? For not one of you has ever told me that my own son is on David's side. You're not even sorry for me. Think about it. My own son encouraging David to try and kill me." Then Deod the Edomite, who was standing there with Saul's men, spoke up. "When I was at Nob, I saw David talking to Ahimelech the priest. Ahimelech consulted the Lord to find out what David should do, and then he gave David food and the sword of Goliath the Philistine." Good morning. King Saul immediately sent for Ahimelech and his family, who served as priests at Nob. When they arrived, Samuel shouted at him, "Listen to me, you son of Ahitub." "What is it, my king?" Ahimelech asked. "Why have you and David conspired against me?" Saul demanded. "Why did you give him food and a sword? Why have you inquired of God for him? And why did you encourage him to revolt against me and come here and attack me?" "But sir," Ahimelech replied, "is there anyone among all your servants who is as faithful as David, your son-in-law? Why, he is the captain of your bodyguard and a highly honored member of your household. This was not the first time I consulted God for him. Please don't accuse me and my family in this matter, for I knew nothing of any plot against you." "You will surely die, Ahimelech, along with your entire family," the king shouted, and he ordered to his bodyguards, "Kill these priests of the Lord, for they are allies and conspirators with David. They knew he was running away from me, but they didn't tell me." But Saul's men refused to kill the Lord's priests. Oh, good. I was really hoping that they would. Then the king said to Doeg, "You do it." So Doeg turned on them and killed them. Wow. 85 priests in all, still wearing their priestly tunics. Then he went to Nob, the city of the priests, and killed the priests' families, men and women, children and babies, and all the cattle, donkeys, and sheep. Doeg, his name is spelled Doeg, the first bounty hunter, is awful. He's awful. And, to slaughter a priest in his robe, that takes... Okay. Only Abiathar, the son of Ahimelech, escaped and fled to David. When he told David that Saul had killed the priest of the Lord, David exclaimed, "I knew it. When I saw Doeg there that day, I knew he would tell Saul. Now I have caused the death of your father's family. Stay here with me, and I will protect you with my own life, for the same person wants to kill us both." One day news came from David that the Philistines were at Keilah, stealing grain from the threshing floors. David asked the Lord, "Should I go and attack them?" "Yes, go and save Keilah," the Lord told him. But David's men said, "We're afraid, even here in Judah. We certainly don't want to go to Keilah to fight the whole Philistine army." So David asked the Lord again. He was like, "Are you sure?" And the Lord replied, "Yes, go down to Keilah, for I will help you conquer the Philistines." So David and his men went to Keilah. They slaughtered the Philistines and took all their livestock and rescued the people of Keilah. Abiathar the priest went to Keilah with David, taking the ephod with him to get answers for David from the Lord. Saul soon learned that David was at Keilah. "Good," he exclaimed, "we've got him now. God has handed him over to me, for he's trapped himself in a walled city." So Saul mobilized his entire army to march to Keilah and attack David and his men. But David learned of Saul's plan and told Abiathar the priest to bring the ephod and asked the Lord what he should do. And David prayed, "O Lord God of Israel, I've heard that Saul is planning to come and destroy Keilah because I am here. Will the men of Keilah surrender me to him? And will Saul actually come as I have heard? O Lord God of Israel, please tell me." And the Lord said, "He will come." Again David asked, "Will these men of Keilah really betray me and my men to Saul?" And the Lord replied, "Yes, they'll betray you." So David and his men, about 600 of them now, left Keilah and began roaming the countryside. Word soon reached Saul that David had escaped, so he didn't go to Keilah after all. David now stayed in the strongholds of the wilderness in the hill country of Ziph. Saul hunted him day after day, but God did not let him be found. One day near Horesh, David received the news that Saul was on the way to Ziph to search for him and kill him. Jonathan went to find David and encouraged him to stay strong in his faith in God. "Don't be afraid," Jonathan reassured him. "My father will never find you. You're going to be the king of Israel, and I will be next to you, as my father is well aware." So the two of them renewed their covenant of friendship before the Lord. Then Jonathan returned home, while David stayed at Horesh. But now the men of Ziph went to Saul in Gibeah and betrayed David to him. "We all know where David is hiding," they said. "He's in the strongholds of Horesh, in the hills of Hachilah, which is the southern part of Jeshimon." So the men of Ziph turned him in. "Come down whenever you're ready, O king, and we'll catch him and hand him over to you." "The Lord bless you," Saul said. "At least someone is concerned about me. Go and check again and be sure where he is staying and who has seen him there, for I will know that he is very crafty. Discover his hiding places and come back with a more definite report, and then I'll go with you. And if he is in the area at all, I'll track him down, even if I have to search every hiding place in Judah." So the men of Ziph returned home ahead of Saul. Meanwhile, David and his men had moved into the wilderness of Moab at the Arabah Valley south of Jeshimon. When David heard that Saul and his men were searching for him, he went even further into the wilderness to the great rock and remained there in the wilderness of Maon. But Saul kept after him. He and David were now on opposite sides of a mountain, and just as Saul and his men began to close in on David and his men, an urgent message reached Saul. And the Philistines were raiding Israel again. So Saul quit the chase and returned to fight the Philistines. Ever since that time, the place where David was camped had been called the Rock of Escape. David then went to live in the strongholds of En-Gedi. Okay, guys, this is our last chapter in 1 Samuel for today. Yes, we're almost caught up. Okay. After Saul returned from fighting the Philistines, he was told that David had gone into the wilderness at En-Gedi. So Saul chose 3,000 special troops from throughout Israel and went to search for David and his men near the rocks of the wild goats. At the place where the road passes some sheepfolds, Saul went into a cave to relieve himself. As it happened, David and his men were hiding in that very cave. "Now is your opportunity," David's men whispered to him. "Today is the day the Lord was talking about when he said, 'I will certainly put Saul in your power to do with as you wish.'" Then David crept forward and cut off a piece of Saul's robe. But then David's conscience began bothering him because he had cut Saul's robe. The The Lord knows I shouldn't have done it, he said to his men. It's a serious thing to attack the Lord's anointed one, for the Lord himself has chosen him. So David sharply rebuked his men and did not let them kill Saul. After Saul had left the cave and gone on his way, David came out and shouted after him, "My lord and king." When Saul looked around, David bowed low before him. Then he shouted to Saul, "Why do you listen to the people who say I'm trying to harm you? This very day you can see with your own eyes it isn't true. For the Lord placed you at my mercy back there in the cave. Some of my men told me to kill you, and I spared you, for I said, I will never harm him. He is the Lord's anointed one. Look, my father, at what I have in my hand. It is a piece of your robe. I cut it off, but I didn't kill you. This proves I'm not trying to harm you, and I have not sinned against you, even though you've been hunting for me to kill me. The Lord will decide between us, and perhaps the Lord will punish you for what you're trying to do to me, but I will never harm you. As the old proverb says, from evil people come evil deeds, so you can be sure that I would never harm you. Who is the king of Israel trying to catch anyway? Should he spend his time chasing one who is as worthless as a dead dog or a flea? May the Lord judge which one of us is right and punish the guilty one. He is my advocate, and he will rescue me from your power. Saul called back, "Is that really you, my son David?" And then he began to cry. And he said to David, "You are a better man than I am, for you have repaid me good for evil. You've been wonderfully kind to me today, for when the Lord put me in a place where you could have killed me, you didn't do it. Who else would let his enemy get away when you had him in his power? May the Lord reward you well for your kindness that you've showed me today. And now I realize that you are surely going to be king, and Israel will flourish under your rule. Swear to me by the Lord that when that happens, you will not kill my family and destroy my line of descendants." So David promised, and Saul went home, and David and his men went back to their stronghold. Okay, so now we have to go back to Psalms, and then we're almost done. Okay, Psalms 7. There's a lot of Psalms, guys, sorry. Okay, Psalm 7. I come to you for protection, O Lord my God. Save me from my persecutors. Rescue me. If you don't, they'll maul me like a lion, tearing me to pieces with no one to rescue me. O Lord my God, if I have done wrong and am guilty of injustice, if I have betrayed a friend or plundered my enemy without cause, then let my enemies capture me. Let them trample me to the ground, and let my honor be left in the dust. Interlude. He's singing again. Arise, O Lord, in anger. Stand up in the fury of my enemies. Wake up, my God, and bring justice. Gather the nations before you. Sit on your throne, high above. I am innocent, O Most High. End the wickedness of the ungodly, and help all those who obey you. For you look deep within the mind and heart, O righteous God. God is my shield, saving those whose hearts are true and right. God is a judge who's perfectly fair, and he's angry with the wicked every day. If a person does not repent, God will sharpen his sword. He will bend and string his bow. He will prepare his deadly weapons and ignite his flaming arrows. The wicked conceive evil. They're pregnant with trouble and give birth to lies. They dig a pit to trap others and fall into it themselves. They make trouble, but it backfires on them. They plan violence for others, but it falls on their own head, as the boys are fighting. I will thank the Lord because he's just, and I will sing praise to the name of the Lord Most High. Okay, now chapter 27. Chapter 27. The Lord is my light and my salvation, so why should I be afraid? The Lord protects me from danger, so why should I tremble? When evil people come to destroy me, when my enemies and foes attack me, they will stumble and fall. Though a mighty army surrounds me, my heart will know no fear. Even if they attack me, I remain confident. The one thing I ask of the Lord, the thing I seek most, is to live in the house of the Lord for all the days of my life, delighting in the Lord's perfections and meditating in his temple. For he will conceal me there when troubles come. He will hide me in his sanctuary. He will place me out of reach on a high rock, and then I will hold my head high above my enemies who surround me. At his tabernacle I will offer sacrifices with shouts of joy, singing and praising the Lord with music. Listen to my pleading, O Lord. Be merciful and answer me. My heart has heard you say, "Come and talk with me," and my heart responds, "Lord, I'm coming." Do not hide yourself from me. Do not reject your servant in anger. You've always been my helper. Don't leave me now. Don't abandon me, O God, my salvation. Even if my father and mother abandon me, the Lord will hold me close. Teach me how to live, O Lord. Lead me along the path of honesty, for my enemies are waiting for me to fail. Do not let me fall into their hands, for they accuse me of things I've never done and breathe out violence against me. Yet I'm confident that I will see the Lord's goodness while I'm here in the land of the living. Wait patiently for the Lord. Be brave and courageous. Yes, wait patiently for the Lord. Good morning. Okay, so now chapter 31. Okay. O Lord, I've come to you for protection. Don't let me be put to shame. Rescue me, for you always do what is right. Bend down and listen to me, and rescue me quickly. Be for me a great rock of safety, a fortress where my enemies cannot reach me. You are my rock and my fortress. For the honor of your name, lead me out of this peril. Pull me from the trap my enemies have set for me, for I find protection in you alone. I entrust my spirit into your hand. Rescue me, O Lord, for you are a faithful God. I hate those who worship worthless idols. I trust in the Lord. I am overcome with joy because of your unfailing love, for you've seen my troubles, and you care about the anguish of my soul. You've not handed me over to my enemy, but have set me in a safe place. Have mercy on me, O Lord, for I am in distress. My sight is blurred because of my tears. My body and soul are withering away. I'm dying from grief, and my years are shortened by sadness. Misery has drained my strength, and I am wasting away from within. I am scorned by all my enemies and despised by my neighbors. Even my friends are afraid to come near me. When they see me on the street, they turn the other way. I have been ignored as if I were dead, as if I were a broken pot. I've heard many of the rumors about me, and I'm surrounded by terror. My enemies conspire against me, plotting to take my life. But I'm trusting you, O Lord, saying, you are my God. My future is in your hands. Rescue me from those who hunt me down relentlessly. Let your favor shine on your servant, and your unfailing love save me. Don't let me be disgraced, O Lord, for I call out to you for help. Let the wicked be disgraced. Let them lie silent in the grave. May their lying lips be silenced, those proud and arrogant lips that accuse the godly. Your goodness is so great. You've stored up great blessings for those who honor you, and you've done so much for those who come to you for protection, blessing them before the watching world. You hide them in the shelter of your presence, safe from those who conspire against them. You shelter them in your presence, far from accusing tongues. Praise the Lord, for he has shown me his unfailing love. He kept me safe when the city was under attack, and in fear I had cried out. I've been cut off from the Lord. But you heard my cry for mercy and answered my call for help. Love the Lord, all your faithful ones, for the Lord protects those who are loyal to him and harshly punishes those who are arrogant. So be strong and take courage, all you who put your hope in the Lord. Okay, 34. Okay. I will praise the Lord at all times. I will constantly speak his praises. I will boast only in the Lord. All those who are discouraged take heart. Come, let us tell the Lord's greatness. Let us exalt his name together. I prayed to the Lord, and he answered me, freeing me from my fears. Those who look to him for help will be radiant with joy. No shadow of shame will darken their faces. I cried out to the Lord in my suffering, and he heard me. He set me free from all of my fears. For the angel of the Lord guards all who fear him, and he rescues them. Taste and see that the Lord is good. Oh, the joys of those who trust in him. Let the Lord's people show him reverence, for those who honor him will have all they need. Even strong young lions sometimes go hungry, for those who trust in the Lord will never lack any good thing. Come, my children, and listen to me, and I will teach you to fear the Lord. Do you want to live a life that is long and good? Then watch your tongue. Keep your lips from telling lies, and turn away from evil and do good. Work hard at living in peace with others. Wow. If you want to live a life that's long and good, watch your tongue. Keep your lips from telling lies, turn away from evil and do good, and work hard at living in peace with others. The eyes of the Lord watch over those who do right. His ears are open to their cries for help. But the Lord turns his face against those who do evil. He will erase their memory from the earth. The Lord hears his people when they call to him for help and rescues them from their trouble. He's close to the brokenhearted and rescues those who are crushed in spirit. The righteous face many troubles, and the Lord rescues them from each and every one. For the Lord protects them from harm. None of their bones will be broken. Calamity will surely overtake the wicked, and those who hate the righteous will be punished. But the Lord will redeem those who serve him. Everyone who trusts in him will be freely pardoned. Okay, 52 is the last one for today, guys. The last psalm. You call yourself a hero, do you? Why boast about this crime of yours, you who have disgraced God's people? A psalm of David regarding the time Doug told Saul that Abimelech had given refuge. Okay, so this is a thing to Doug, that awful guy that killed all the priests. You call yourself a hero, do you? Why boast about this crime of yours, you who have disgraced God's people? All day long you plot destruction. Your tongue cuts like a sharp razor, and you're an expert at telling lies. You love evil more than good, and lies more than truth. Interlude. You love to say things that harm others, you liar, but God will strike you down once and for all. He will pull you from your home and drag you from the land of the living. Interlude. The righteous will see it and be amazed. They will laugh and say, look what happens to mighty warriors who do not trust in God. They trust their wealth instead and grow more and more bold in their wickedness. But I am like an olive tree thriving in the house of God. I trust in God's unfailing love forever and ever. I will praise you forever, O God, for what you have done. I will wait on your mercies in the presence of your people. Okay. Well, guys, that was a lot to read, and that was pretty crazy. We've gone through Saul throwing spears at David and Jonathan, and David running away and not killing Saul, and now him crying out to God. So we're all caught up. Yes. And I think that we're going to be reading again tomorrow. This week I'm going away because my mom is getting married, and I'm not going to be here for a couple days, so I don't want us to get this far behind. This was a lot to read in one day. So thank you for sticking with me. Thank you for being here. It's much easier to read when I have friends with me. Let me know if you have any questions or comments, and I should be back tomorrow so that we can keep reading. So I hope that you guys have a fantastic Sunday. It was great to hang out with you. Thank you, and I will see you soon. Bye.